Hatano shechatzotzai b'nesorim oibirius. You have your tano, which is a classic kli cheres. We've been through a tano many times before. It's a cylindrical object, conical, sits on the ground. One heats it up with a fire. One sticks lumps of dough inside the tanur to bake. The tanur is a kli cheres. If you then split the tanur with a board, actually severing the airspace of the tanur into two sections, with no gap between section A and section B. Oibirius, you hang a curtain down the tanur, thus dividing the tanur into two sections. Says the Mishnah, you've done nothing as far as the tanur is concerned. Nimtza sheretz b'mokim echad hakol tomei. If it's a sheretz in section A, you cannot split a kli cheres into two. Kli cheres is manufactured, it has a purpose. This is the tanur. You cannot artificially split the kli cheres into two sections. Therefore, nimtza sheretz b'mokim echad, wherever the sheretz is found, hakol tomei, the whole tanur is still makabel tomei. If you make a kli cheres lechatchila in different sections, we had before kalmer and amtu omos at the end of perik base, then you can consider each section to be a separate toich, and the sheretz being in one section is not able to be metame the second part. But once a kli cheres is formed, you cannot now artificially segment it into separate sections. It is still one kli. And we'll see the contrast of this with tumas meis and oil later on in the Mishnah. So that din in the Mishnah is quite simple. Now we're going to carry on with another din, and this din is now going to introduce the concept of toich toichai. Remember, with a kli cheres, you have the rule that when there's a sheretz inside the kli cheres becomes tomei. Similarly, if the kli cheres is already tomei, then any oichelin or mashkin which find itself in the toich of the kli cheres become tomei because of the kli cheres. However, imagine a situation where you have a kli cheres, right? A big kli cheres, and then you have another kli cheres, a smaller kli cheres, inside the big one. It doesn't actually have to be a kli cheres, it can be any keli inside the big one. But that keli is boiled, it sticks out a little bit from the first kli cheres. So the opening to the inner keli is completely, the pesach of the inner keli is completely outside the pesach of the outer keli. Now we have a case what's called toich toicha. We have the toich of the outer kli cheres, but we have now a new toich, a little toich, which has been defined by the inner kli. Therefore, that's called the toich. That's not the toich of that inside kli is not considered to be the same toich as the outside kli. It's called toich toichai. And the Torah says, we learn it from a pasuk, that if a sheretz is found in the little toich, or the toich toichai, that's not able to be metame the outside kli cheres, because the sheretz is not in the outside toich, it's in the toich toich, it's in the toich of the little kli. And who adin, if the outside kli is tomei, and it's oichel and mashkin inside the little toich, then again the oichel and mashkin stay tar, because the oichel and mashkin are not in the toich of the outside kli cheres, they're in the toich toichai, and toich toichai is a separate toich as tar. So this rule that you can create another toich inside the first toich, which is able to be matzil and to be metaher things inside it, or if a sheretz is inside it, it is not able to be metame the outside kli, only works when this new toich, the toich toichai, is actually being created by a kli. However, if this new area is created by something which is not a kli, for instance, if you have a broken receptacle, and even though it may be that the area confined by this new toich is completely surrounded by the broken receptacle. In other words, the pesach of the inside little kli is sticking out, and therefore you've still got a similar situation to the one we just described. But you cannot have a toich toichoi if that inner toich is not in a kli. Toich toichoi is defined that it's a second kli which makes the toich. And that's what the Mishnah is going to tell us here. If we have our tanur, which is a big outside kli cheres, then you have a kaveris, pechusa u'bekuka bakash. A kaveris is a large kli, and it's a beehive actually. You can actually use, for this Mishnah's data, it can be made from anything. But pechusa means it's broken. Because it's broken, the kaveris now loses its shem kli. So although physically it is able to create an area, a space inside the tanur, which seems to be bounded by the broken bits of the kaveris. However, because it's not a kli, this section surrounded by the kaveris is not considered to be toichoi. Says the Mishnah, kaveris bechusa, it's broken. Upekuka bakash, even if the broken pieces are actually stuffed with straw, and you may think this is some sort of a repair job, you don't repair a kaveris by stuffing it with straw. It still remains, says the Mishnah, a shever kli, it's not a kli anymore. Umeshul sheles la'avir tanur, and this kaveris bechusa is suspended into the outer bigger kli of the tanur, but creating a space. Sort of, it looks like a toich toicha. It looks like we've now created a new toich, independent of the bigger toich of the tanur. Nevertheless, because this new toich has not been created by a kli sholem, therefore you have not got a case of toich toicha, and therefore hasheretz besoicha, if there is a sheretz inside this kaveris, but below the rim of the tanur, so it's still also in the toich of the tanur, hatanur tome, because you haven't got the hatzolah of toich toichai. And vice versa, hasheretz betanur, if there is a sheretz in the tanur, then any oichlin shebesoicha, any oichlin umashkin trapped inside the kaveris, even though, because it's below the rim of the tanur, we don't have a hatzalah of toich toicha because we're not dealing with a kli. It's a kli it's a shever kli. Says the Mishnah, oichlin shebesoicha tmeyin. Because toich toicha is only hatzalah when the new toich, the inner toich, has been created and formed by a kli sholem. Rabbi Eliezer Matayr. Now there's a machlokes in the Rishonim what Rabbi Eliezer is referring to. We'll learn the simple pshat, which is actually Rashi. Rashi learns Zvachim, that Rabbi Eliezer is actually arguing on the whole Mishnah. In other words, the first bit of the Mishnah where we said that if you split a kli into two, it doesn't help. It still remains one kli. And you can't segment the kli by just putting artificially a urea or a nessa down the middle of it. And who added in the second part of the Mishnah, where we said that if you put a kaveres pechusa, a broken kli, you cannot now create a new geder of toich toichai. In other words, you cannot ruin the old big toich of the tanur. In both these cases, Rabbi Eliezer says you can. You can split a tanur into two segments, so that if the sheretz is in segment A, it's not matame segment B. And similarly, if you split the tanur by creating a new toich toichai, although under the rules of toich toichai you haven't got proper toich toichai because the toich toichai has not been formed by a kli, but nevertheless, because you've physically created a section which is distinct, which is discrete from the bigger klicheres around it, you've been successful in carving out an area which is not considered to be part of the original toich. And Rabbi Eliezer has a kal v'chomer. He says, if we're dealing with tumas meis, which of course is more chomer than tumas sheretz, with tumas ohiolim, tumas oholas, oholas shel meis. If you have a room, you can artificially put a curtain down the middle of the room. As long as the curtain goes all the way across, you've now created two segments of the room, and if the mace is in section A, section B remains tar. If already a curtain, an artificial, temporary mechitza, can split a room into two oihalim, so that the tumah cannot travel from part A to part B, imetzilo b'meisach chomer, if a temporary. And huadin, this argument would apply to the case of the toich toicha, which has been formed by a shever kli. If that works, b'meisach chomer al tatzlo b'klicheres hakal, surely it can certainly work with klicheres hakal when all we're dealing with is a tumas sheretz. Amrulai. So the Chachamim said back to Rabbi said no. He said, true, you can split a room into two sections artificially by putting a board or a curtain down the middle of it. That's what one does. Oihalim are man-made structures, and people create oihalim and rooms and sections of rooms as they see fit. If they want to split a room into two, they put a curtain down the middle. That's how oihalim are made and destroyed. Are you going to say it works with the klicheres hakal, with ordinary sheret and a keli? She'en cholken klicheres. A kli is something which has been fashioned and formed for a particular object. That's what defines the kli, is the way it's used. One cannot split a kli into two parts. You can break the kli, but you cannot artificially split it. It's a difference in the metzius. An oihel is something built by man in order to use the inside of the oil for a particular tashmish. He can then decide to split a room into two because he's now got two rooms. He's actually building two rooms. But a kli is something formed by the manufacturer for a particular usage. The usage is to use the kli in its entirety. You cannot now artificially split the kli into two sections. That was a difficult Mishnah. I'm going to carry Mitzvah Shem with Mishnah base soon.